The International Poetry Forum was founded in 1966 under a grant from the A.W. Mellon Educational and Charitable Trust. The purpose was to create a space where poetry could speak for itself in a public setting. From 1966 to 2009, more than 700 poets, actors, and singers from 38 different countries, plus the United States, appeared under forum auspices. Among this number were Nobel awardees, Pulitzer and National Book Award winners, Academy Award actors, and singers. In addition, the forum sponsored a Poets in the Schools program, co-presented programs at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington for 10 years, and for the same period funded the publication of books of prize-winning American and foreign poets in conjunction with the University of Pittsburgh Press. My name is Samuel Hazo, and I founded the International Poetry Forum and directed it from that 43-year period until its conclusion. This documentary, drawn from the Forum's archives, now housed at Carlow University in Pittsburgh, will present a selection of poets and actors who appeared during that era. The inaugural poet on October 19, 1966, was Archibald MacLeish. In his opening remarks, he said,
"A festival devoted to poetry over a period of time may or may not do anything for the city in which it is established, but it can't help making a difference to poetry."
Year after year, poet after poet validated MacLeish's prophetic remark, and little by little, poetry readings or poetry hearings became an expected and accepted presence in Pittsburgh's cultural life. People from all walks of life left their homes on clear, rainy, or snowy evenings and paid to hear them. Season ticket holders numbered in the hundreds. One of the poets they heard in that first year was Richard Wilbur, the multi-awarded poet, translator, essayist, and professor who eventually appeared on 4 different occasions.
Now, here's a poem about my own daughter, Ellen, who's by now turned into a very good short story writer, has published one book called Wind and Birds and Human Voices, and is probably on the verge of publishing another. This looks back at her as she was in her junior high school days, when she came home daily and sat up in her room trying to write short stories. Then her life and her writing were more precarious than now. The writer. In her room at the prow of the house, where light breaks and the windows are tossed with linden, my daughter is writing a story. I pause in the stairwell, hearing from her shut door a commotion of typewriter keys like a chain hauled over a gunwale. Young as she is, the stuff of her life is a great cargo, and some of it heavy. I wish her a lucky passage. But now it is she who pauses, as if to reject my thought and its easy figure. A stillness greatens in which the whole house seems to be thinking. And then she is at it again with a bunched clamor of strokes, and again is silent. I remember the dazed starling which was trapped in that very room 2 years ago, how we stole in, lifted a sash and retreated, not to affright it, and how for a helpless hour through the crack of the door we watched the sleek, wild, dark, and iridescent creature batter against the brilliance, dropped like a glove to the hard floor or the desktop, and wait then, humped and bloody, for the wits to try it again. And how our spirits rose when, suddenly sure, it lifted off from a chair back, beating a smooth course for the right window and clearing the sill of the world. It is always a matter, my darling, of life or death, as I had forgotten. I wish what I wished you before, but harder. That poem appears to be quite popular at present, and it's turning up in textbooks and anthologies, and they're having to start annotating it, to explain the noisiness of the typewriter.
And here is Linda Paston, whose conjugal poems occupy a significant place in modern American poetry and range in subject matter from the humorous to the seriously tender.
An early afterlife. Why don't we say goodbye right now in the fallacy of perfect health before whatever is going to happen happens? We could perfect our parting like those characters in On the Beach who said farewell in the shadow of the bomb as we sat watching, young and holding hands at the movies. We could use the loving words we otherwise might not have time to say. We could hold each other for hours in a quintessential dress rehearsal. Then we would just continue for however many years were left. The ragged things that are coming next, arteries closing like rivers silting over, or rampant cells stampeding us to the exit, would be like postscripts to our lives and wouldn't matter. And we would bask in an early afterlife of ordinary days, impervious to the inclement weather already in our long-range forecast. Nothing could touch us. We'd never have to say goodbye again.
From abroad came Seamus Heaney, both before and after he received the Nobel Prize for Literature. He never lost sight of his origins. His poems remained defiantly Irish at their cores, but universal in their sentiments and implications.
Between my finger and my thumb the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse bud nestled in the lug. The shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Tolar's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle, corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. When all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. They broke the silence, let fall one by one like solder weeping off the soldering iron. Cold comfort set between us, things to share, gleaming in a bucket of clean water. And again let fall. Little pleasant splashes from each other's work would bring us to our senses. So when the parish priest at her bedside went hammer and tongs at the prayers for the dying, and some were responding, and some crying, I remembered her head bent towards my head, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives. never closer the whole rest of our lives.
Paired for a joint reading were Lucille Clifton and Charles Cosley. The evening was a remarkable mix of the serious whimsy of Lucille Clifton and the Cornwall lyricism of Charles Cosley.
I think probably the poem of mine that people might know best is a poem about my hips. I'll say that one. I haven't read it in a long time. I'll say that poem. I mean, everybody has body parts, you know. I just write about them. And people have said to me, men poets don't write about body parts. And now this is a loving thing, which I often say. That if I only had one interesting body part, I wouldn't write about it either. Anyway, I don't have it here, but let's see. This is called Homage to My Hips. And I wrote it because we live in a culture that likes big everything but women. We like Cadillacs, we like big bottles of liquor, we like big houses, we like teeny little women. I don't understand. Homage to my hips. These hips are big hips. They need space to move around in. They don't fit into little petty places. These hips are free hips. They don't like to be held back. These hips have never been enslaved. They go where they want to go. They do what they want to do. These hips are mighty hips. These hips are magic hips. I have known them to put a spell on a man and to spin him like a top.
Here's a ballad. I just wanted to read you two ballads. This one is called The Ballad of the Bread Man. It's about the same length as the one that I read just now. Ballad of the Bread Man. The bread man, I don't know what you call the bread man, it's the baker. Mary stood in the kitchen, baking a loaf of bread. An angel flew in through the window. "We have a job for you," he said. God, in his big gold heaven, sitting in his big blue chair, wanted a mother for his little son. Suddenly saw you there. Mary shook and trembled. "It isn't true what you say." "Don't say that," said the angel. "The baby's on its way." Joseph was in the workshop, planing a piece of wood. "The old man's past it," the neighbor said. "That girl's been up to no good." "And who was that elegant fella," they said, "in the shiny gear?" Things they said about Gabriel were hardly fit to hear. Mary never answered. Mary never replied. She kept the information, like the baby, safe inside. It was election winter. They went to vote in town. When Mary found her time had come, the hotels all let her down. The baby was born in an annex next to the local pub. At midnight, a delegation turned up from the Farmers Club. They talked about an explosion that made a hole in the sky. Said they'd been sent to the Lamb and flagged to see God come down from on high. A few days later, a bishop and a 5-star general were seen at the head of an African country in a bulletproof limousine. "We've come," they said, "with tokens for the little boy to choose." Told the tale about war and peace on the television news. After them came the soldiers with rifle and bomb and gun, looking for enemies of the state. The family had packed and gone. When they got back to the village, the neighbor said to a man, "That boy will never be one of us, though he does what he blessed well can." He went round to all the people, a paper crown on his head. "Here is some bread from my father. Take, eat," he said. Nobody seemed very hungry. Nobody seemed to care. Nobody saw the God in himself quietly standing there. He finished up in the papers. He came to a very bad end. He was charged with bringing the living to life. No man was that prisoner's friend. There's only one kind of punishment to fit that kind of crime. They rigged a trial and shot him dead. They were only just in time. They lifted the young man by the leg. They lifted him by the arm. They locked him in a cathedral in case he came to harm. They stored him, safe as water, under 7 rocks. One Sunday morning, he burst out like a jack-in-the-box. Through the town he went walking. He showed them the holes in his head. "Now do you want any loaves?" he cried. "Not today," he said.
Another pairing that left a permanent memory was one with W.S. Merwin and Thomas Tranströmer of Sweden. A poem of particular interest to many in the audience focused on John Berryman, who was Merwin's mentor when both men were at Princeton.
I want to read a poem about another forebear of a different kind. A poet whom I knew when I was in college and used to take my poems to, and he would tell me what was wrong with them. And he did it without mincing his words. He was a poet who's read here, in fact, John Berryman. Man, incredible brilliance and gift. And not a very easy character. Not a very easy teacher. The poem is called Berryman. I will tell you what he told me in the years just after the war, as we then called the Second World War. Don't lose your arrogance yet, he said. You can do that when you're older. Lose it too soon and you may merely replace it with vanity. Just one time he suggested changing the usual order of the same words in a line of verse. Why point out a thing twice? He suggested I pray to the muse, get down on my knees and pray right there in the corner, and he said he meant it literally. It was in the days before the beard and the drink, but he was deep in tides of his own, through which he sailed chin sideways and head tilted like a tacking sloop. He was far older than the dates allowed for, much older than I was. He was in his 30s. He snapped down his nose with an accent I think he had affected in England. As for publishing, he advised me to paper my wall with rejection slips. His lips and the bones of his long fingers trembled with the vehemence of his views about poetry. He said the great presence that permitted everything and transmuted it in poetry was passion. Passion was genius, and he praised movement and invention. I had hardly begun to read. I asked, how can you ever be sure that what you write is really any good at all? And he said, you can't. You can't. You can never be sure. You die without knowing whether anything you wrote was any good. If you have to be sure, don't write.
Mr. Tranströmer, his Nobel Prize still more than a decade away, said a poem that recalled a trip he made to China.
Streets in Shanghai. Many in the park are reading The White Butterfly. I love that cabbage butterfly as if it were a fluttering corner of truth itself. At dawn, the running crowds set our silent planet going. Then the park fills with people. For each one, 8 faces, polished like jade, for all situations, to avoid mistakes. For each one also the invisible face, that reflects something you don't talk about. Something that emerges in tired moments and is as pungent as a sip of viper schnapps with its long, scaly aftertaste. The carp in the pond are always moving. They swim while they are sleeping. They are an example for the faithful, always in motion. Now it's noon. The washing flatters in the grey sea wind high above the cyclists, who come in tight shoals. Notice the labyrinth to the sides. I am surrounded by written characters I can't interpret. I'm illiterate, through and through. But I have paid what I'm supposed to, and I have receipts for everything. I have gathered so many unreadable receipts. I'm an old tree with withered leaves that hang on and can't fall to earth. And the gust from the sea rustles all these receipts. At dawn, the trudging crowds set our silent planet going. We are all on board the street. It's as crowded as the deck of a ferry. Where are we going? Are there enough teacups? We can consider ourselves fortunate for getting on this street in time. It's 1,000 years before the birth of claustrophobia. Behind each one walking here hovers a cross that wants to catch up to us, pass us, join us. Something that wants to sneak up on us from behind and cover our eyes and whisper, "Guess who?" We look almost happy out in the sun, while we bleed to death from wounds we know nothing about.
Natural humor does not come easily or naturally to many poets to whom seriousness is absolute, but it did come to Mona Van Dyne when she dealt with her fear of flying.
The poem is called Views. First poet. I fly all the time and still I'm afraid to fly. I need to keep both feet on the ground, the earth within reach of my eyes. In airports, I comfort myself by assessing others. Look at that handsome necktie, the weave of that suit, the portfolio. People of worth are going to be on this plane. The pearls on that shelf of expensive bosom, the hairdresser's art. All this tells my shuddering spirit that God wouldn't tip my seatmates, all these important people, from sight. Once the stewardess passed the word that Liz would be joined in Rome by Richard Burton, who was up in first class. I have never felt so safe on a flight. Second poet. I too fly all the time, and still I tremble. I arrive too early and sit there sweating and cold. I read at a book and can't make out what it means. I look around at the others as they assemble and make a collection of the dowdy old, backpacking young, slouched in their dusty jeans, men who have business suits of the wrong size on, fizzled hair, greasy hair, and drooping hem. Humbly they live, and humbly they will die. This scroungiest bunch of people I've ever laid eyes on. Surely God has no special fate in mind for them. I tell myself, like a plane falling out of the sky.
In a completely different vein was Carolyn Forche's poem entitled The Colonel. This colonel is from an unspecified country, but having spent many days in Central America and Lebanon, Carolyn Forche had seen brutality at close quarters, and in this instance, it actually bled into this riveting poem.
The Colonel. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. It came alive there. "I am tired of fooling around," he said. "As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves." He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. "Something for your poetry, no?" he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground.
What Carolyn Forche saw as a visiting American, Derek Walcott inherited as a resident, a man of the Caribbean who transcended the colonialism that was his inheritance and forged a vision of what he saw as the Caribbean nation. This poem, like the poems recited at the forum by Heaney and Transtromer, was said before Walcott received the Nobel Prize, and it gave it an international affirmation and audience.
I sang of quiet Achille, Apholabe's son, who never ascended in an elevator, who had no passport since the horizon needs none, never begged nor borrowed, was nobody's waiter, whose end, when it comes, will be a death by water, which is not for this book, which will remain unknown and unread by him. I sang the only slaughter that brought him delight, and that from necessity of fish. Sang the channels of his back in the sun. I sang our wide country, Caribbean Sea, who hated shoes, whose soles were as cracked as a stone, who was gentle with ropes, who had one suit alone, whom no man dared insult, and who insulted no one, whose grin was a white breaker cresting, but whose frown was a growing thunderhead, whose fist of iron would do me a greater honor if it held on to my casket's oarlocks than mine lifting his own when both anchors are lowered in the one island. But now the idol dies, the goblet is broken, and rainwater trickles down the brown cheek of a jar from the clay of Choiseul. So much left unspoken by my chirping nib, and my earth door lies ajar. I lie wrapped in a flour sack sail. The clods thud on my rope-lowered canoe. Rasping shovels scrape a dry rain of dirt on its hold. But turn your head when the sea almond rattles, or the rust-leaved grape from the shells of my unpharaonic pyramid towards paper, shredded by the wind and scattered like white gulls that separate their names from the foam, and nod to a fisherman with his khaki dog that skitters from the wave crash, then frown at his form for one swift second. In its earth trough, My pirogue with its brass-handled oarlocks is sailing, not from but with them, with Hector, with Maud, in the rhythm of her beds troweled over, with a swirling log lifting its mossed head from the swell. Let the deep hymn of the Caribbean continue my epilogue. May waves remove their shawls as my mourners walk home to their rusted villages, good shoes in one hand, passing a boy who walked through the ignorant foam and saw a sail going out or else coming in, and watched asterisks of rain puckering the sand.
Memorable for their brevity were two poems that seemed to be over before they began, but in each instance the effect of each poem lingered. The first is a poem entitled Prayer by Galway Kinnell, and the second is a poem by Billy Collins entitled No Time.
Prayer. Whatever happens, what is what I want. Only that, but that.
And it's called No Time. In a rush this weekday morning, I tap the horn as I speed past the cemetery where my parents are buried side by side under a smooth slab of granite. Then, all day long, I think of him rising up to give me that look of knowing disapproval, while my mother calmly tells him to lie back down.
Alastair Reid, a writer at home in various genres, recited a moving elegy to his father, pausing with barely concealed sorrow when he said the final line, because, as with all poems of farewell, there really is no final line.
We changed the mood. I'll read you a poem now called My Father Dying. At summer succulent end, the house is green stained. I reach for my father's hand and study his ancient nails. Feeble-bodied, yet at intervals a sweetness appears and prevails. The heavy-scented night seems to get at his throat. It is as if the dark coughed. In the other rooms of the house, the furniture stands mum chance. Age has graved his face. Cradling his wagged-out chin, I shave him, feeling bones stretching the waxed skin. By his bed, the newspaper lies furrowed. He has grown too old to unfold the world, which has dwindled to the size of a sheet. His room has a stillness to it. I do not call it waiting, but I wait, anxious in the dark, to see if the butterfly of his breath has fluttered clear of death. There is so much might be said, dear old man, before I find you dead. But we have become too separate now in human time to unravel all the interim as your memory goes numb. There is no need for you to tell, no words, no wise counsel, no talk of dying well. We have become mostly hands and voices in your understanding. The whole household is pending. I am not ready to be without your frail and wasted body, your miscellaneous mind way, the faltering vein of your life. Each evening I am loth to leave you to your death. Nor will I dwell on the endless cumulative question I ask, being your son. But on any one of these nights soon, for you, the dark will not crack with dawn. And then I will begin with you that hesitant conversation going on and on and on.
Philip Levine's poems are in the vernacular of people who go out and work every day for a living. Euphemisms are happily absent. He brings this unique and earthy directness in this tribute to his sister.
Go listen carefully. My sister rises from our bed hours before dawn. I smell her first cigarette and fall back asleep until she sits on the foot of the bed to pull on her boots. Knowing she's still naked from the waist up, I shouldn't look, but I do. She sees me looking and smiles, musses my hair, whispers something secret into my ear, something I can't tell anyone because it makes no sense. Hours later, I waken in an empty room, smelling of yesterday. The sunlight streams across the foot of the bed, and for a moment, I actually think it's Saturday and I'm free. Let me be frank about this. My older sister is not smart. I answer all her mail for her. And on Sundays, I even make dinner because the one cookbook confuses her, although it claims to be the way to a man's heart. She wants to learn the way. She wants a husband, she tells me. But at 26, she's beginning to lose hope. She makes good money doing piecework, assembling the cups that cap the four ends of a cross of a universal joint. I've seen her at work, her face cut with slashes of grease, while with tweezers she positions the tiny rods faster than you or I ever could. Her eyes behind goggles fixed, her mind God knows where, roaming over all the errors she thinks make her life. Her men aren't good to her, and she doesn't know why. I've seen the places they've hit and clawed to get what they want. I've rubbed cold cream into the bruises on her shoulders. I've even cried along with her for the awfulness of it. By now, I know exactly what you're thinking. Although I don't get home until after 1 every night, we sleep in the same bed, unless she's not there. You're thinking there's no way we wouldn't be driven to each other. No way we could resist. No way someone as wronged as my beautiful sister could have a choice about something so basic. The truth is, you're the one who's wrong. You haven't heard a word.
Three poets who were contemporaries in time, if not in subject, were Carl Shapiro, Maxine Kumin, and Donald Hall. Carl Shapiro's poem Skyros is a surreal Mediterranean collage from World War II. Maxine Kumin's We Stood There Singing recaptures a trip by car in the Swiss Alps with her daughter and grandson, and a stop along the way that gave birth to the poem. And Donald Hall conveys beautifully and longingly a portrait of the durable and faithful horses that he remembers from his ancestral farm in New England.
The doctor punched my vein, the captain called me king. Upon my belly sat the sow of fear. With coins on either eye, the president came by and whispered to the braid what none could hear. High over where the storm stood steadfast, cruciform, the golden eagle sank in wounded wheels. White Negroes laughing still crept fiercely on Brazil, turning the navies upward on their keels. Now one by one the trees, stripped to their naked knees, to dance upon the heaps of shrunken dead. The roof of England fell, Great Paris tolled her bell, and China staunched her milk and wept for bread. No island singly lay, but lost its name that day. The Ainu dived across the plunging sands. From dawn to dawn to dawn, King George's birds came on, strafing the tulips from his children's hands. Thus in the classic sea, southeast from Thessaly, the dynamited merman washed ashore, and Tritons dressed in steel trolled heads with rod and reel and dredged potatoes from the Aegean floor. Hot as the sky and green where Germans have been seen, the moon leaks metal on the Atlantic fields. Pink boys in birthday shrouds loop lightly through the clouds or coast the peaks of Finland on their shields. That prophet, year by year, lay still but could not hear where scholars tapped to find his new remains. Gog and Magog ate pork in vertical New York, and war began next Wednesday on the Danes.
It's called We Stood There Singing. On a gray day in March in his first year, we drove up out of orderly Geneva, mother and daughter, and the daughter's child, up the hairpin turns of the Chasseral in search of the horses of the Franche Montagne, with feathered fetlocks and manes blown wild, each splashed white face the same kind eye, said to persist unchanged since Charlemagne. The baby slept tipped sideways in his chair, slept through sudden snow squalls that blanked the Alpine road like a stage scrim, and woke up cranky in Les Brûleurs, where, at the village's one store, we stopped to take our bearings. When he howled, the aproned woman invited us back past vats of sauerkraut and wheels of cheese into their bedroom. I remember that plain space of rough white plaster, oaken crucifix, oak beams overhead, runner of tatted lace on the chest of drawers. I remember the lambskin she unrolled on the bed, motioning you to lay him down, and after he was done up, sweet with powder, she opened her arms and bounced him chortling around the room, singing him bits of Le Bon Roi d'Agobert. We stood there singing. I remember that moment of civility among women.
Names of horses. All winter your brute shoulders strained against collars, padding and steer-hide over ash hames, to haul sledges of cordwood for drying through spring and summer, for the Glenwood stove next winter, and for the simmering range. In April you pulled cartloads of manure to spread on the fields, dark manure of Holsteins, and knobs of your own clustered with oats. All summer you mowed the grass in meadow and hayfield, the mowing machine clacketing beside you, while the sun walked high in the morning. And after noon's heat, you pulled a clawed rake through the same acres, gathering stacks, and dragged the wagon from stack to stack, and the built hay rack back uphill to the chaffy barn, 3 loads of hay a day, hanging wide from the hay rack. Sundays you trotted the 2 miles to church with the light load of a leather quarter-top buggy, and grazed in the sound of hymns. Generation on generation, your neck rubbed the windowsill of the stall, smoothing the wood as the sea smooths glass. When you were old and lame, when your shoulders hurt bending to graze, one October the man who fed you and kept you and harnessed you every morning led you through corn stubble to sandy ground above Eagle Pond, and dug a hole beside you where you stood, shuddering in your skin, and lay the shotgun's muzzle in the boneless hollow behind your ear, and fired the slug into your brain and felled you into your grave, shoveling sand to cover you, setting goldenrod upright above you, whereby next summer a dent in the ground made your monument. For 150 years, in the pasture of dead horses, roots of pine trees pushed through the pale curves of your ribs. Yellow blossoms flourished above you in autumn, and in winter, frost heaved your bones in the ground. Old toilers, soil makers. Oh, Roger, Mackerel, Riley, Ned, Nellie, Chester, Lady Ghost.
Although they appeared at different times at the Forum, Miller Williams and Joe McDougall acknowledged each other's friendship in absentia from the stage while they were both here. Williams, the emeritus poet and virtual creator of the University of Arkansas Press, and Joe McDougall, the succinct Flatlander poet from Central Arkansas, both inimitable in their separate ways.
This actually was finished about 7 yellow legal pads and 6 months later because I work slowly and make a lot of mistakes. But it's to be read as if it were spoken there at her crib on the day of her birth. It's called A Poem for Emily. Small fact and fingers and farthest one from me, a hand's width and 2 generations away. In this still present, I am 53. You are not yet a full day. When I'm 63, when you are 10, and you are neither closer nor as far, your arms will fill with what you know by then, the arithmetic and love we do and are. When I, by blood and luck, am 86 and you are someplace else at 33, believing in sex and God and politics, with children who look not at all like me, sometime I know you will have read them this, so they will know I love them and say so, and love their mother. Child, whatever is always or never was. Long ago, a day I watched a while beside your bed, I wrote this down. A thing that might be kept a while to tell you what I would have said when you were who knows what and I was dead, which is, I stood and loved you while you slept.
Favorite places in the world, like restaurants, bars, coffee shops, places maybe don't even want to talk about, that go through changes. Personally, it just makes me mad. When the Buck R2 Steakhouse changed hands. When the Buck R2 Steakhouse changed hands, they put plastic over the menus. They told the waitresses to wear white shoes. They fired Rita. They threw out the unclaimed keys and the pelican with the toothpick that bowed as you left. Thank you.
Ishmael Reed mentioned during his presentation that he had once seen John F. Kennedy. Although it was only in passing, that moment stayed with him, and finally it germinated into an elegy that became his featured poem of the evening.
Which was the 25th anniversary of the assassination. This magic bullet, jumped all, and so this is that poem. I was feeling grumpy that day, so I wrote this. In California, the day looks as though it's seen a ghost. An obstreperous storm is heading for the Sierras. The forecast is cloudy, gloomy, and gray. There is not a dry eye on TV. They're showing the archival footage. Air Force One setting down in Dallas. The bouquet in Jackie's hands. The cruel scene in Washington as politicians grapple with your coffin. The riderless horse. Little John saluting. The face down in Cuba. Ich bin ein Berliner. You told the White Citizens Council that if you could negotiate with Khrushchev, then they could negotiate with Negroes. You made Ole Miss swallow hard. You slammed Alabama, stuffing its throat with Jim Crow. Even on Dan Rather's face, there is a struggle. It's been 20 years, and his youngest wants to know, why did they murder you? The theories are as common as homeless people huddled together in the Port Authority under a bridge in Santa Cruz, Lafayette Park, across the street from the White House. He agrees with the date. He feels like an old back pain. Eloisa wants to know why he's acting like a Grinch as he swivels grumpily in her barber's chair. And maybe Carla is right when she says, you were like all the rest, only smoother. But when they took you out, Jack, it was as though his generation was hit in the belly with a medicine ball. They never recovered their wind, their shape, their tone. And they don't care what the tabloids say, Jack, you're still their boy. And maybe it's best that you left them, waving from a motorcade, a smile bigger than Texas, fresh as that October day Askia and he saw you stride into the Carlisle Hotel, bareheaded, unovercoated, surrounded by men shaking in their long johns. It's not pretty what's become of the U.S. It's like the room inside a grisly crime movie about which the homicide detective warns, don't go in there. It smells like something that's been dead in the sun too long. It jerks about like the new chief's syntax. It has the style of an inside trader's ill-fitting collar. It bungles along like your lunkish successors in black tie and tails, executing a mean foxtrot at the inaugural ball.
When Czesław Miłosz appeared at the Forum in 1975, the audience was partially composed of Pittsburghers of Polish extraction, and he read several poems of his in Polish in deference to that. After he received the Nobel Prize and returned for a second reading, the audience was, unsurprisingly, much larger. This poem is from his first visit.
On the day the world ends, a bee circles a clover, a fisherman mends a glimmering net, happy porpoises jump in the sea, by the rain-spout young sparrows are playing, and the snake is gold-skinned, as it should always be. On the day the world ends, women walk through the fields under their umbrellas, a drunkard grows sleepy at the edge of a lawn, vegetable vendors shout in the streets, and a yellow-sailed boat comes nearer the island. The voice of a violin lasts in the air and leads into a starry night. And those who expected lightning and thunder are disappointed. And those who expected signs and archangels' trumps do not believe it is happening now. As long as the sun and the moon are above, as long as the bumblebee visits a rose, as long as rosy infants are born, no one believes it is happening now. Only a white-haired old man who would be a prophet, yet is not a prophet for he is much too busy, repeats while he binds his tomatoes, "There will be no other end of the world. There will be no other end of the world." So now, the same in Polish. W dzień końca świata pszczoła krąży nad kwiatem nasturcji, rybak naprawia błyszczącą sieć. Skaczą w morzu wesole delfiny, młode wróble czepiają się rynny i wąż ma złotą skórę, jak powinien mieć. W dzień końca świata kobiety idą polem pod parasolkami, pijak zasypia na brzegu trawnika. Nawolują na ulicy sprzedawcy warzywa i łódka z żółtym żaglem do wyspy podpływa, dźwięk skrzypiec w powietrzu trwa i noc gwiaździstą odmyka. A którzy czekali błyskawic i gromów, są zawiedzeni. A którzy czekali znaków i archanielskich trąb, nie wierzą, że staje się już. Dopóki słońce i księżyc są w górze, dopóki trzmiel nawiedza róże, dopóki dzieci różowe się rodzą, nikt nie wierzy, że staje się już. Tylko siwy staruszek, który byłby prorokiem, ale nie jest prorokiem, bo ma inne zajęcie, powiada, przewiązując pomidory: innego końca świata nie będzie, innego końca świata nie będzie.
Many of the poets who appeared at the forum included poems about war and other losses in their programs. Poets like Louis Simpson, Brian Turner, Sam Hamill, Richard Wilbur, and John Ciardi drew from their own experiences. C.K. Williams, in a poem called Shrapnel, by concentrating on the irony and waste and tragedy of war, spoke for them all.
This one is called Shrapnel. It's got a lot of quotes in it, and when you're not reading it on the page, it's a little confusing, so I'll say quote when I'm quoting. I won't go like that. Never like that. But I will say quote. It's called Shrapnel. 700 tons per inch, I read, is the force in a bomb or shell in the microsecond after its detonation. And 2,000 feet per second is the speed at which the shrapnel, the materials with which the ordnance is packed, plus its burst steel casing, quote, stretched, thinned, and sharpened, unquote, by the tremendous heat and energy, are propelled outwards in an arc until they strike an object and either ricochet or become embedded in it. In the case of insufficiently resistant materials, the shards of shrapnel can cause, quote, significant damage, unquote, in human tissue, for instance, rupturing flesh and blood vessels and shattering and splintering bone. Should no essential organs be involved, the trauma may be termed, quote, superficial, unquote, as by the chief nurse, a nun, in Ian McEwan's Atonement, part of which takes place in a hospital receiving wounded from Dunkirk. It's what she says when a soldier cries "fuck" as her apprentice, the heroine, a young writer-to-be, probes a wound with her forceps to extract one of the many jagged fragments of metal from a soldier's legs. Fuck was not to be countenanced back then. "How dare you speak that way," scolds the imperious sister. "Your injuries are superficial, so consider yourself lucky and show some courage worthy of your uniform." The man stays still after that, though, quote, he sweated and his knuckles turned white round the iron bedhead, unquote. "Only 7 to go," the inexperienced nurse chirps, but the largest chunk, which she saved for last, resists. At one point it catches, protruding from the flesh, quote, "He bucked on the bed and hissed through his teeth," unquote. And not until her third resolute tug does the whole, quote, gory 4-inch stiletto of irregular steel, unquote, come clear. Quote, shrapnel throughout the body, unquote, is how a 10-year-old killed in a recent artillery offensive is described. Shrapnel throughout the body. The phrase is repeated along with the name of each deceased child in the bulletin released as propaganda by our adversaries at whose operatives the barrage was directed. There are photos as well. One shows a father rushing through the street, his face torn with a last frantic hope, his son in his arms, rag limp, chest and abdomen speckled with deep dark gashes and smears of blood. Propaganda's function, of course, is exaggeration. The facts are there, though. The child is there, or not there. As the shrapnel is no longer there in the leg of the shoulder of the soldier, the girl holds it up for him to see. The man quips, "Run him under the tap, nurse. I'll take him home." Then, quote, he turned to the pillow and began to sob, unquote. Technically, I read, what's been called shrapnel here would have once been defined as splinters or fragments. Shrapnel referred then only to a spherical shell named after its inventor, Lieutenant Henry Shrapnel. First used in 1804, it was, quote, guaranteed to cause heavy casualties, the best man killer the Army possessed, unquote. Shrapnel was later awarded a generous stipend in recognition of his contribution, quote, to the state of the art, unquote. Where was I? The nun, the nurse leaves the room, throws up. The fictional soldier, the real child, the father. What becomes of the father? He skids from the screen, from the page, from the mind. Shrapnel's device was superseded by higher-powered, more efficient projectiles, obsolete now in their turn. One war passes into the next. One wound is the next and the next. Something howls. Something cries.
It seems only appropriate to conclude this selective survey drawn from 4.5 decades of the Forum's presentations with a clairvoyant poem by Ellen Bryant Voigt entitled Dancing with Poets.
And this is a poem called Dancing with Poets that I want to read for Sam. And I have to do the rabbit thing again because it opens with 2 words that are spoken by this other character. The accident is what he calls the time he threw himself from a window 4 floors up, breaking his back and both ankles so that walking became the direst labor for this man who takes my hand, invites me to the empty strip of floor that fronts the instruments, a length of polished wood the shape of a grave. Unsuited for this world, his body bears the marks of it. His hand is tense with effort and with shame, and I shy away from any audience, but I love to dance. And soon we find a way to move, drifting apart as each affects a different ripple across the floor, a plaid and a stripe to match the solid navy of the band. And suddenly the band is getting better. So pleased to have this pair of dancers, since we make evident the music in the noise. And the dull pulse leaps with unexpected riffs and turns. We can hear how good the keyboard really is, the bright cresting of another major key as others join us. A strict block of a man, a formidable cliff of mind, dancing as if melted, as if unhinged. His partner a gift of brave elegance to those who watch her dance. And at her elbow, Berryman back from the bridge, and Frost relieved of grievances, Dickinson waltzing there with lavish Keats, who coughs into a borrowed handkerchief, all those poets of exile and despair, unfit for this life, all those who cannot speak but only sing, all those who cannot walk, who strut and spin until the waiting citizens at the bar, aloof, judgmental, begin to sway or drum their straws or hum, leave their seats to crowd the narrow floor. And now we are one body, sweating and foolish, one body with its clear, pathetic grace, not lifted out of grief, but dancing it, transforming for one night this local bar before we're turned back out to our separate selves, to the dangerous streets and houses, to the overwhelming drone of the living world. Thank you.